Hello, Felix from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing The House of the Dead Remake on the Nintendo Switch. Now, this review was originally written by Chris Scullion, but was converted into video by me. Two years ago, Polish studio Forever Entertainment released an HD remake of Sega Saturn's classic Panzer Dragoon. Our review at the time stated that the remake was interesting but flawed, but ultimately concluded that even though it wasn't perfect, we were glad it at least existed so more people could at least get a chance to play it in some form. Fast forward to the present day, and Forever Entertainment is back with another remake of a classic Sega IP, and this time it's the legendary arcade light gun shooter, The House of the Dead. As fate would have it, it turns out our opinion is much the same as Forever's take on Panzer Dragoon. It's welcome, but not perfect. For those who've been unfortunate enough to not have the House of the Dead in their lives up until this point, the game takes place in around the Curien mansion as players try to stop the evil Dr. Curien and his laboratory. Curien has been performing some fairly grim experiments, which has resulted in the mansion being overrun with a horde of zombies and other mutants, so it's up to you to clear out the House of the Dead. Slap a few bullets into Curien's rump on the way out, and also rescue your girlfriend who is at the house because of reasons. As wonderfully versatile as the Switch is, the light gun games can prove a little tricky for it because there's no truly perfect way to replicate the experience. The Wii provided one of the best and most accurate home light gun experiences, but without a sensor bar, the Switch has to rely purely on gyro controls, which isn't really ideal. Whether you're playing with the Joy-Con separately in either hand, using the Pro Controller or in handheld mode, there's an option to play with gyro controls. On paper, that's the way to do it. And keeping it calibrated isn't even a massive problem. Pushing the cursor onto the edge of the screen and bringing it back to the sensor generally gets the job done. The main problem we have with the gyro controls is that every time we fire, either with A button or particularly with the CR trigger, the cursor twitches and throws off our aim. We aren't sure if this is down to the oversensitivity on the controller's part, but it can make things really frustrating when you're trying to hit targets at a distance or even mid-range. It's also a mess for boss fights, where you ideally want to keep your cursor focused on a weak spot, but it's jumping all over the place. We should note that we're not exactly John Woo's stuntmen when we're playing light gun games. We consciously try to keep our hands and trigger fingers as steady as possible while playing, and the cursor still kept jumping. We found that playing with the Pro Controller remedied the situation a little. Not entirely, mind you, but enough that things weren't so frustrating. Let's face it though, when you're playing a light gun game, you want to feel like you're holding a gun, and the Joy-Cons are more gun-like than a Pro Controller, even if it's a tiny gun like the one in Men in Black. There's also an option to use the controller stick to move the cursor instead, which is obviously far less intuitive but at least more accurate. The default settings for this do the job for the most part, though it's hard to react and aim quickly, but there are a bunch of sensitivity settings that you can mess around with until you get something you're happy enough with. Obviously though, it's still not an ideal situation. One of the main benefits of this genre is that anyone, regardless of the game's ability, is supposed to be able to pick up a gun and immediately know what they're doing. That level of intuitive control is certainly not present here. Initially, while we're at it, we would love if Forever Entertainment could patch in the ability to use the touchscreen to just tab where we want to shoot. It would obviously make the game a lot easier, but at least it would be perfectly accurate, and it would be a great help in the Horde mode, which we'll address in a second. Assuming you find a control method that you're happy enough with, the game itself is as entertaining as the House of the Dead has ever been. Blowing away zombies is still brilliantly satisfying, all while relishing in the beautifully awful voice acting. There's also an option to blast through it with a pal with local multiplayer. Being an arcade game though, it's still very brief. There are a few different endings to provide at least some replay value, but the control issues mean you trying to get some of them, which requires a high degree of accuracy and skill, could have you tearing off your own face ironically. Once you've had your fill with the main arcade mode, there's also a new mode called Horde, which is essentially the same thing but gives you loads of zombies to deal with in each area instead of just a couple at a time. In a sense, it's a more fun, action-packed version of the game, but in practice it also exposes the control issues even more when you have more targets to quickly deal with. Visually it's fine, as it's a remake that isn't just the original arcade game with an HD upscale and high-res textures applied. All the game's characters, locations, and enemies has been rebuilt from scratch. They're detailed enough, and the improved lighting is nice and moody, if a tad basic. Where the game does suffer a little is in performance. On its default settings, the frame rate can judder frequently, which isn't ideal for a game that requires quick reactions like this. There's an option to turn on performance mode, which brings everything far closer to the stable frame rate, but while this essentially solves the problem without too many compromises while docked, it can make things look blurrier when playing in handheld mode. Ultimately, the House of the Dead remake has clearly been made with love from the source material, and fans of the original will still likely enjoy seeing how Forever Entertainment has given it a new lick of paint. How much fun you'll have with it, however, will depend on how willingly you are to tinker with its settings until you're happy enough with its controls. It's infuriating every time you fail to save a scientist because you're blasting away at a zombie and don't hit it through no fault of your own. And you shouldn't have to spend time twiddling with sensitivity and dead zone options to alleviate something that should just work. We here at Nintendo Life give the House of the Dead remake on the Nintendo Switch a 6 out of 10. And that was the review. Before you go, I would like to share a bit of my own thoughts on this game, because I thought this game was really fun. Now, I'm not very much into first-person shooters and zombie games, but this was just great old fun. Like Chris said, there were some difficulties with the controls and stuff, but I figured out some good sensitivity options and I just had great fun. A thing he didn't mention was that you can reset your gyro controls with the Y button press, where in the start I also just pulled my sensor or cursor all the way to the side to reset it, but you can just press Y and it just relocates into the middle. That helped out a lot. Also, another thing he didn't mention was that the main protagonist just says reload all the time, and it can get really annoying. So what I just did was, instead of have manual reload on, I just reloaded all the time, so it's like shoot, reload, so it's like do, and that was just really fun. I mean, I didn't think the game was too hard after I started doing that, because I don't know, you didn't have to think about reloading and didn't distract you with the reload. Also, the Horde mode was, I think it was much more fun than the normal mode, because there was just so much more going on, and it was still hard, but not too hard, if that makes sense. The voice acting, completely horrible, but it just added to the charm of this game. I was a big fan of this game. The premise is really simple, it's really easy to get into, save the scientist, defeat the bad guy, all that stuff. If you like first-person shooters, zombie games, or just want to feel like a child sitting in an arcade again, please give this game a go. It's a blast, the graphics are alright, and in dock mode it runs fairly well. That was everything. Thanks again to Chris Scullion for lending me his wonderful words. I'll see you guys in the next one. Felix from Nintendo Life here, out.